Fjällräven, we've been very humble the last years talking about our sustainability journey. And we like to say no a lot. But when we met Flexport, we understood there's so much we can learn from and improve from, actually reducing our climate impact. So actually we said yes to Flexport instead of saying no again.
The big reason for us to start looking into Flexport as a potential partner for our forwarding business was we wanted to be comfortable with the data that we're looking at, and we wanted to have more visibility, more transparency, and more accurate data. And one of the key things that we have seen over the past couple of years with regard to sustainability is that data is of absolute key importance to make sure that you're reporting correctly what you're emitting through transportation.
I'm very excited about this partnership with Fjällräven because this is how we want to work with clients. We want to help them understand their environmental impact and then find the best possible solutions to reduce their environmental impact.
We choose Flexport because we thought that Flexport in our logistics operation takes an important role. Fjällräven has a mission that we want to reduce our CO2 emissions all over. Biofuels, in particular maritime biofuels, have a big role to play because many of our products, if not most of them, are shipped by sea. So going the avenue and say, let's try out biofuels is a first good move into the direction of renewable energy sources for marine transportation.
Our partnership, to me, is a perfect example of how freight buyer, mover of international freight, and LSP, logistics service provider, can actually work together to reduce emissions throughout the whole supply chain. To me, that'd be exciting. I love that. Is it going to change the world on its own? No, that would be naive. But I think the reality is it shows, it signals to the wider ecosystem what's possible and that there's a demand for these solutions that we offer. Customers want it, LSPs care, customers care, and that's a very powerful message.
Hello everyone, and thank you. After this, thank you for attending today's webinar, Measuring Sustainability Efforts in Global Supply Chain. I'm very excited to host this one together with our client Fjällräven. My name is Marnix van Dishoek and I'm a commercial team lead here at Flexport in Europe. I'm excited because basically this webinar and this partnership combines two passions of mine, the great outdoors and supply chains. The outdoors I'm enjoying since I can walk basically, and the industry I fell for during my studies in Rotterdam, where I met the exciting dynamics of this world. Before we kick it off, a few housekeeping items to keep in mind. On your screen you will see this sidebar. It's right of the main stage. And if at any time you need any assistance during the live webinar, please just give us a message and our production team is there to help. Also, questions you want to raise for later on in the Q&A, we'll hold at the end of the session, by the way. You can drop it in the Q&A chat there, and we will try our best to host these at the ending. And in the menu above your screen, you will have two tabs. In the first tab, you can download the copy of today's slide deck, and in the second tab there's a brief feedback survey that we would love you to fill out because we're always open to feedback and take this along in the next one. Then a brief legal note before we jump into the content. Please keep in mind that all information provided in the session is based on the situation at current time and may not be customized to your specific business requirements. We always recommend reaching out to Flexport expert to discuss your particular situation. And if you ask me, I would recommend to reach out to me because I would be more than happy to. Then off to our experts in the panel today. Joining me are four experts. First of all, Gijs from Fjällräven side. He's Global Transportation Sourcing Manager at Fjällräven, our main contact and responsible for all inbound and outbound transportation flows at Fjällräven, and actually behind this partnership, the true pioneer. So very excited to have him on board today. Then, of course, Maria, the Sustainability Environmental Manager at Fjällräven, involved with many more sustainability initiatives with Fjällräven, so she will shine some light on those cool topics that they're running outside of this partnership. And then Rogier, he's joining us from the Good Shipping. It's a partner we have, having seen anything from airline to retail industry. He's here today on behalf of Good Shipping, and he will shine some light on the fueling side of things. And then, of course, our own KJ, manager of Flexport.org in EMEA, true Flexport veteran, if I may call you like that, KJ. And she knows the industry like the back of her hand. Now, off to the content. Let's go. Why are we hosting this webinar today? It's basically because the ocean transportation as a whole should play a major role in tackling climate change. After shifting away from air freight, ocean is the biggest thing you can have an impact, and where there are some pretty cool solutions. So that's what we want to bring to your attention. And we're partnering with Fjällräven to enable them to reduce their ocean transportation emissions footprint. And the biggest aim of today is show you how this could work for any other supply chain and learn from this example that we find very exciting, and we hope you do as well. We have also Good Shipping, as I mentioned in the room, and we're partnering with them to provide our clients basically the ability to reduce and start looking at what can I do. We want to help you identify the low-hanging fruits for your business and supply chain and show the importance of mitigating these emissions. Then, first, we would like to involve you, the virtual room today, and ask you 2 questions. You can just click on the screen to let us know your input, and we will take this with us during the webinar. We'll present the results further down the line, but if you can answer the first question, how do you currently measure emissions in your supply chain, if you're doing that or if you're not, and if you're doing so, at what kind of level are we talking about? We would love to know this. I'll just give you a second. And then the second one, yes, we're true. Yeah. And does your company have any sustainability goals in place? And if you do, at what kind of level? Are we talking company levels? Are we already talking concrete team level goals? How occupied are your teams? Are we thinking about this enough? Is this still work in progress? We'd love to have your input. It's only a 2 questions exam today, so we'll kick off with the first topic we'll talk about, and that's why should I act now? There's a lot of noise and news and press attention around this topic, but let's talk to our panelists of today. Maria and Rogier, welcome to the stage. May I pass this question to you and have your view on why it's so super important that we start acting?
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. So what we see at Fjällräven is that sustainability requirements in general become more and more demanding from customers and stakeholders. And there's an increased interest from them to dive really deep into a brand supply chain and to really understand the holistic approach of our sustainability strategy. And saying that, sustainability is one of our guiding principles at Fjällräven, but we as a company, we face the tricky question of how we can preserve nature, which is one of our most important assets, and at the same time produce products that inevitably have an impact on nature, right? So we are walking a fine line between the here and now and the future, and that's why we are trying to minimize our environmental footprint as much as we can. And our overall sustainability goals until 2025 are to reduce our emissions in line with a 1.5 degree target. We strive to implement zero waste operations, to create circular products, and to also develop circular business models. And we want to set up the most premium and sustainable supply chain with full transparency. And with respect to our climate target, we know that our biggest share of emissions lies in the value chain, as it does for other producing brands. And part of this value chain belongs to hard-to-abate sectors, as for example, the transportation sector. So what is important to us is to understand which options do we have for adopting biofuels as one puzzle piece to the set of solutions to decrease our emissions from transportation. And since we don't ship volumes to use container ships to capacity, and because due to the fact that there's still a very limited infrastructure we could use with regards to the vessels and the ports, we wanted to try the book and claim mechanism. And for the future, we hope to be able to use biofuels in like physical biofuels in our vessels that we use for shipping our products. And starting now is a good time because book and claim is available right now. That was pretty much different in the past.
Yeah. And I think for Fjällräven, it's pretty much inside of the DNA, of course, of the company. And Rogier, maybe the same question to you. How do you view this from your perspective?
Thanks, Magnus, and good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Why should I act now? It's a question that we often hear. Let's not forget that we at the moment are operating in a voluntary carbon market. So it's voluntary, it's becoming step by step more mandatory. Why should we act now? Well, in general, the biggest picture there is our planet. So all of us need to have a contribution to contribute to a better planet. I think we all see the examples in which direction this is going. So we need to counteract this, and doing all this together, everybody will add to that. But if we zoom in, let's say for this moment at an enterprise level, the corporate level, so customers that are served by Flexport, where we are a proud partner of, then you could say, why should I act now as an enterprise? In a voluntary market where I'm not yet fully obliged. Now then, as Maria already mentioned, there is increasing pressure from stakeholders. So we also see with customers that there are pressure from, for example, from employees, young generation that demand from their employer that become more sustainable. We also see pressure from, for example, for banks. Financing is not always provided if an enterprise doesn't comply to specific sustainability requirements or standards. We also see RFPs where corporates are not able to submit an offer or participate in the tender if they do not comply to certain sustainability standards. So, and then we also have end consumers where probably Fjällräven also has influence of. So there are multiple stakeholders that are putting increasing pressure on corporations to comply and to work on more sustainable efforts, sustainable supply chain. So that's one thing, pressure from stakeholders. The other one is also, let's say, the mandatory environment. So in a voluntary market, we see that it's becoming more and more mandatory. Examples, for example, are the CSRD reporting requirements, but also ETS, Fuel EU Maritime coming up in the maritime industry next year. So step by step gets more mandatory. And then you can also question as an enterprise, do I need to step on this train now or do I need to wait? And how long am I going to wait? And we know that by waiting, you significantly postpone this moment that you start to decarbonize. And carbon is cost. It's as simple as that. So if you would wait too long by taking measurements and work on a more sustainable way of operating, then you will be faced with a high cost of, let's say, gearing up your organization, starting up cost, catching up, but even carbon taxes, financial penalties that will definitely accompany a more mandatory market coming up.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting. And would you say that there's also a learning curve that enterprises need to go through before programs or any mitigating actions really are in place and well set up? Or
absolutely, it's such a new area and it's changing rapidly in terms of regulations, requirements, frameworks, book and claim, as Maria also mentioned. So it's a high-paced environment. It's a very interesting environment, but it's also our job, and it's also the job, for example, of Flexport towards its customers to guide them and to support them in taking these steps into a more sustainable supply chain. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. That's a good one, and there are resources in place, so that's good. Hopefully, we show most of them or touch most of them today. Thanks so much. So yeah, it's really around getting those ducks in a row before a compliance market kicks into effect. But even better, if it's in the strategy or in the core of businesses, then you have that intrinsic driver to start today. Let's have a look at the result of the polls, if we can pull those up. It's actually, I have to make my screen a little bit bigger here. It's actually interesting. So maybe Rogier, you can reflect on what you have here with the results.
It's very small, I must say. Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
So that's actually interesting because most of the entities seems to have a concrete target for every team. That's actually a good sign because that means that corporate strategy or high level goals are broken down and teams are looking into it. That accumulates up to 40%. Interesting. And then the second group is it's found important but nothing concrete yet. Do you recognize these distributions from conversations you're having on a weekly basis?
For us, it's quite recognizable. Definitely, we see fortunately an increasing percentage of clients that do have high-level goals in sustainability objectives. Think, for example, of net zero targets, etc., by 2030, by 2040, 2050. But exactly, I'm not surprised to see high-level goals, but no team targets. So often, drilling down these high-level targets to mid-level and lower levels and become more and more precise. That's often not yet in place. And at the end, it's about simply take action. Do it. You have your targets, break them down into small milestones, very smart, clear deliverables, and start decarbonization. That's very important. So high-level targets is absolutely great to have. It's a big step, and you need to map out a lot of things. You need to know your emissions, you need to know your profile, etc. Of course, also a budget, which is attached to it. But then you need to start somewhere. And for that, you need to have very precise, clear, measurable targets.
Interesting. And Maria, how's this at Fjällräven?
Yeah, I think this is a pretty good picture of where we are at the moment. So we do have high-level goals, but we don't have team targets for each and every team. And working on this project, I realized that we really need these team targets to make sustainability a day-to-day business. So without the targets, we will never reach really operationalize sustainability. So sustainability performance needs to understand specific processes in each department. And I'm not a specialist in logistics, so without my colleagues, I'm lost. I will never reach my climate targets. It's super important, and it's great to see that we have the high level goals that we can break down then on team level. So that's a great start.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks for sharing. So next we'll look at how and what exactly you want to measure within your supply chain, and we're going to break that up in those two. But first, let's have a look at what the virtual room shared in basically how they are measuring today. Let's have a look at those poll results while we pull those up. And then we'll have Gijs and KJ joining us on stage. Okay, so that's actually interesting. So 52% is currently not measuring those emissions. And then the second group is via certified emission calculators indeed. And some people start using it, but based on estimates. How did this go down for you guys and the Fjällräven team?
Well, I was really curious in seeing these results actually, especially if you compare the results that we see in here, where you see that there are high-level goals, but over 50% of the people are responding that we don't measure emissions. So first thing that came to mind with me is, okay, if you have high-level goals but you don't measure emissions, how do you know where you're going to improve? And understanding your supply chain, understanding your flows, understanding what potential focus areas are where you can actually make differences in reducing your emissions is going to be a key thing. What our learning here has been is that we saw, because we're a global company with different parts of the business in different parts of the world, we saw different ways of working a couple of years back. And one huge benefit would make it a lot easier and more transparent and easier to benchmark and understand our behavior and the emissions that we emit through our transportation operations is standardization of the way of measuring. So you can use a certified portal or system, but we chose the CLAC framework. I think that's also the framework that's being used in the Flexport portal. So that's one first thing you need to do, I would say, and actually getting to the highest possible level of accuracy, because it's always going to be an estimation on what your emissions are going to be. You need to compromise a little bit, but you need to understand what assumptions you are making and what does it mean.
Yeah. And I know you're pretty involved with the data analytics side of things. You like to dive deep on those analysis. And how much effort or what kind of time spent should logistics team think about when really getting to those details to enable decision making and start looking at offsetting or insetting, like.
Well, I think like Maria also mentioned, it starts off with knowing what you do, and the fundamentals is some data to see what you do. Is you need to know what modality you're using when you're doing a transportation from point A to point B. You need to know from where to where it's going, and you need to know how much you actually moved. And that's kind of level number one to do emission calculations, and then you can advance and go further and further and further. But that's really the bare minimum. And most 3PLs or transport parties that most people on this call will be working with are able to provide those numbers, and from there on you can really start measuring. And when you start measuring, you will see where your opportunities are.
Yeah, interesting. And KJ, anything to add from your perspective, what you hear and see while talking to our clients?
Yeah, definitely. I think Thijs makes a really good point about the transparency. And that goes, we're seeing that more and more as a trend in the market of shippers and cargo owners needing to have more understanding of their actual supply chain, right? We're moving past, I won't say fully past the days of faxes, right? But having that visibility and those data points to understand contingency planning, right? Not just on an emissions level, but generally control of your entire supply chain with the disruptions that we see on a more regular basis year over year now. So having that transparency and control, and then being able to indeed measure and visualize the emissions that come from an air shipment versus the equivalent moving via ocean, it becomes a very stark contrast and a very real world tangible supply chain in when it comes to the environmental impacts. So when we're talking about that, I think, being able to visualize using an accredited framework is really important, because then you have confidence that the measures that you're taking, you can then tell a good story, right? This is what we started with. This is where we're intending to go. And these are the concrete actions that we're going to take to get there. And I think for client or companies like Fjällräven, and especially those that are more consumer facing, being able to conceptualize that story for those end consumers becomes really important as a part of your branding as well.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, our customers are critical and have been over years. Our products are known for being durable. We want people to test them to the max. So logically, our consumers are also expecting that we do the same in every part of our business. So we need to be able to be transparent in what we do when it comes to emissions.
Yeah, and then basically to the logical next step, if you know what kind of data we're looking at and where are emissions in your supply chain, basically we end up with what measures can you take as a step two. Personally, for me, the essence of today's webinar, what can we actually do about it when we know what we're talking about? KJ, can you shine a little bit more light on the low-hanging fruits, but maybe also the hidden ones?
The low hanging fruit, I would say, is definitely represented by the left side of this slide. So modality switches, right? It's the easiest thing that you can do to reduce your overall supply chain emissions. So if you are a heavy air shipper, for example, right, reforecasting, working with your suppliers to be able to switch to a slower moving option, being ocean, depending on where your supply chain is connected through. Switching from drayage, over the road to a train or a barge option if you have that in your locale. It's the most impactful thing that you can do for your supply chain. Also utilization, right? If you talk about container utilization, whether that's a ULD on air freight or an ocean container, making sure that you're actually utilizing the space that you're purchasing. And this piece of it has a really the finance teams will love this as well, right? Because if you are increasing your container utilization and you have that visibility, we were filling it to 60% and now we've got it up to 90%. Not only are you going to reduce your overall emissions because you're going to be shipping fewer containers, but you're going to be shipping fewer containers. And in the freight market that we have faced over the last few years, if you can reduce the number of containers that you're shipping and still move the same amount of product, everyone wins there. So those are two very tangible things. And then one of the things that we're also seeing with a number of clients is also focusing, right? There is an investment, or it can be an investment here. But if you can take a step-by-step process, right? Rohir mentioned this, that we have to start somewhere. So emissions measurement, of course, once you've gotten, a part of that going, focusing on one product at a time is also a great way to start. You get familiar with what opportunities are out there. You focus your efforts on maybe a specific product line or a specific, one specific product that you move a lot of. But it allows, your supply chain teams, your finance teams, your sustainability teams to get more familiar with how these programs work and what impact it can have on your overall business.
I actually have a comment on what you just said there, KJ, because you mentioned the model shift from air freight to another mode of transport is the obvious one. I can fully relate to that. That makes a huge difference both in terms of emissions as well as cost of transportation typically. But I probably have a slightly different opinion on that it's the easiest one, because for a lot of shippers, air freight is an obvious solution because it's quick, especially if you compare it to sea freight. So if you would change from air freight to sea freight, that means that you need to do a lot of improvements on your planning typically. So from that point of view, I would say biofuels is much easier to do, or at least that has been for us, because operationally there you don't need to reshuffle your planning, you don't need to redesign your network or anything. You can do what you've already been doing whilst still significantly lowering your emissions. So for us, a logical step towards using marine biofuels.
Absolutely. And I tell my air team that all the time, that I know that in no world will air freight completely disappear.
No.
That's just not the nature of the world that we live in. So you do make a really good point, Gijs, that the insetting and the book and claim solutions are an excellent opportunity because there is no impact on the physical supply chain. So it is an immediate thing that you can do now while you are working on maybe those reforecasting models.
Yeah, I fully agree. Like, you have a whole toolbox of things that you can do, and it's not betting on a single horse, but there's multiple things you should try to do simultaneously.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's something from my perspective, what I see happening, that there are so many choices and options that people get stuck, while just getting started with one or two is already very valuable. Hey, and on basically with an eye on the slide, there are a few things. This is more like an overview. If we look at offsetting, I think Rogier will also join us on stage, because there's a big difference. I've mentioned both already, between offsetting and insetting. Rogier, could you please share a little bit more on that?
Sure. Yeah, these two terms are often exchanged with each other, but it's basically very simple. Insetting is carbon reduction. Offsetting is carbon compensation. That's the best way to remember it. So if you look at insetting, the concept we're discussing today, ocean freight decarbonization through the concept of insetting. So the physical element is detached from the product and service. It's actual carbon reduction within the supply chain, within the maritime sector. So it's carbon is reduced in the same sector that it is emitted in. That's basically the concept of insetting. The end customer, served by Flexport, can in this case officially claim a reduction in scope 3 upstream or downstream transportation. Carbon offsetting, and there are great projects, is mitigation of emissions outside the value chain. And we always advise to do this as a last step for unavoidable emissions. One example is, for example, business travel. Corporate travel, business travel is very complicated, difficult to avoid, almost impossible to reduce, but at least within your sustainability strategy, compensate it with proper projects. That's a big difference between offsetting and insetting. Insetting is true reduction.
Yeah. And that's actually interesting. So you would almost say that you would need a portfolio of things you can choose from and have it ready to have for application when needed or when suitable. Interesting.
Yeah, like you said, Rogier, like we need to lower the absolute numbers of emissions. So you cannot keep offsetting forever.
No, and it's an interesting trend, especially in Europe, that we see a complete shift at this moment from offsetting to insetting, or at least let's say from carbon compensation to carbon reduction. So actually reduction versus, for example, the US market, which is honestly also moving into that direction, but it's a few years behind Europe. But you see a clear overall trend of moving from carbon compensations towards actually actual carbon reduction.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, we're moving on to the next question for our experts today, and that's basically zooming out a bit on what we just discussed. So, what individual companies can do. Now, I would like to focus a bit more on, hey, how do we collaborate across all the players in your supply chain? Because we all know how many parties are involved with moving containers from, for example, the Far East to Europe. It's an interesting industry. And Gijs, could you perhaps walk us through some of the challenges or the things that you focused on while trying to achieve this?
Well, like you said, there's like, especially being involved in global supply chains, there's so many entities involved. So we try to keep a set of standards that we always want to adhere to. And obviously, when it comes to transportation or product sourcing, we do have a choice on what partners we collaborate with. So when it comes to emission reporting or data provision, as we touched upon earlier, we do have some bare minimums that they need to adhere to. That's kind of the starting point. Then the next step is, okay, your reporting capability is okay, but what are you doing as a company? Do you own any assets? What are you doing there? How do you manage your assets? Do you have your own trucks? Do you have planning on renewing your trucks? Are they running on HVO fuels, or are you using biogas or whatever? So, and this is also changing rapidly. And like Rogier said just before, the US is also shifting. And like Northern Europe is a little bit ahead, but the US is following also. And when they start going, it will go quick. I mean, it's a massive market. And once, standard practices will change there. I see a more green world in front of me. Let's put it that way. But the stuff, like to come back to your initial question, the stuff we can influence, we have a set of standards, and we try to be a little bit picky in what partners we collaborate with.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like that's really in the selection stage before even working together, that you already keep this in mind and act on it. And anything to add from your perspective, Maria, because you see maybe even more partners across Fjällräven.
Yeah, so from my perspective, what is really important is that our partners also work on like an industry level. So we know, I mean, we can choose our partners, right, based on our scorecard or based on our values and our due diligence, but we cannot influence how fast the industry moves. And especially in the transportation sector, which is a sector that is so important for so many different industries, we also depend on the speed of the industry in general. And that's why it's important for us that supply chain partners also are taking part in initiatives. And that is also why we are sticking to industry frameworks, for example, because we can be quite sure that it's a big chunk of the industry that supports these kind of frameworks and measurements and also mitigations.
Yeah, and then automatically we end up with those supply chain partners being Flexport in this case. KJ, could you perhaps share a little bit more on what we are trying to do from our perspective after we pass the selection of Gijs, for example?
Yeah, as everyone has said, it's important that as an industry, we're also trying to speak with the same voice. It's a very fragmented industry, and so if everyone goes off in their own directions on how we should be calculating emissions or what types of interventions we think are the most effective, we don't collectively move forward, right? Everyone runs in opposite directions, and that's not good. From a regulatory perspective, it doesn't allow governments and maybe the IMO, these governing transportation bodies to come up with effective strategies. So I think some of the working groups, right, Smart Freight Center, things like this, that are really developing programs and frameworks to enable customers and shippers to get together to talk about what makes sense for the industry, what's logical but also impactful, is really important. And a part of that what Flexport does is we have, within our platform, we're able to calculate non-Flexport shipments as well as our own. And so a big part of that is, again, back to the data transparency, utilizing a tool that allows you to measure your entire supply chain with one. Kais made the comment earlier that emissions measurements, as of right now, they're always going to be an aspect of an estimation because there are these industry averages that are used when we are lacking certain information. We have opened that up to Flexport and non-Flexport shippers so that you can have one place where you're measuring everything so you can compare apples to apples across your entire supply chain. And I think that's really important. It also, it just allows you to have more visibility. And when the industry speaks together, we are also signaling to the vessel owners, for example, and the transportation companies that have to make these investments to meet those demands of the cargo owners, of the end consumers that are demanding greener solutions. So utilizing the same frameworks is really important.
Yeah, and then let's have a look at what we can do knowing this. And I think we'll bring up Rogier for explaining us a little bit and educating us a little bit on the fuels basically being used for decarbonizing the maritime transportation sector. And I think we can move to the next slide, please.
Yeah, don't be scared by seeing this slide. We will keep it as less technical as possible, but trust me, we got experts here in the office that can elaborate on this for hours. I won't bother you with that. As you can see, the name on the slide says Finco Energies. By the way, that's the name of our mother company. Good Shipping is one of the brands. We operate our solutions under the Good brands. So for this webinar, the Good Shipping brand for ocean freight decarbonization is, of course, most applicable. That on the side note. So if you see that the customers of Flexport that are engaging with the green shipping program, to call it that way, or decarbonization within ocean freight, of course, there's a physical operations behind it. And Good Shipping is by nature a biofuel supplier. So we control the biofuels, we control the stock, we control also the bunkering, and let's say the physical element. Now, how do we do that? So if a customer of Flexport says, I want to decrease, for example, 2,000 tons of CO2e in ocean freight shipping, then of course we need to make sure that it is actually done through a physical stream. Now, we basically replace fossil fuel by sustainable biofuel. That's the essence. It doesn't need to be in the same vessel as where the cargo is transported on, but as Maria said before, it needs to be accompanied by a very detailed and very strict book and claim system. Now, physically, the fuels that we use are biofuel oil and biodiesel for deep sea vessels. These engines is just simply a drop-in fuel. Drop-in means no adaptations to the engine. You can use it, you can blend it. Where we basically also have FAME, which is a biofuel that we can blend. Renewable diesel is more common on the name HVO, and that is a bit more for transportation, but also inland shipping. So if you see these three fuels are mainly used within good shipping, within the maritime sector, and they provide an average weighted greenhouse gas reduction of 85%, measured on a well-to-wheel basis, or well-to-exhaust, how you can call it. So we take into account the entire chain. That's why you don't have a 100% reduction, because you need to take into account the production of the fuel and the transportation of the fuel. Now, on the right side, you see two of the latest developments, biomethanol and e-methanol, different technologies. Green electricity is used for that. And there you can see this is the future generation of fuels that they can achieve an average weighted greenhouse gas reduction of 90% plus, actually. It's often higher than 90%. But the supply is scarce at the moment. The costs are very high at the moment. And there are some adaptations to the engines of vessels that need to be done before you can bunker the vessel with these fuels. However, as you can see, we expect in the next 3 years to come that more and more of the biofuels used at the moment will be gradually replaced by the new generation fuels. All in all, what does it mean from a customer point of view? That we can increase the average reduction of greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe one question from my end. What would you recommend? Because it's you already see how fast you go into detail, and it's such a complicated, perhaps world from a distance. If you're not in those details, what do you recommend when people are discovering and looking at different options?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, if you look at deep sea shipping, there are hardly any alternatives. We don't know the future of hydrogen. I don't see ocean-going vessels sailing on a nuclear power source. There will be new technologies coming up, but at the moment, sustainable biofuel is, let's say, the solution to decarbonize in this modality. I won't bore you with the feedstocks. Where we produce the biofuels from? It's completely controlled, etc., and a wide range of feedstocks that we are allowed to use if it's a waste or residual stream. What is important from a customer point of view, so if you, let's say, engage with Flexport on green shipping, as an end customer, your Flexport account manager will provide you with an official certificate, which is independently verified, so you can use it for your carbon reduction. And due to the book and claim, the traceability, you will see as a customer, next to your certificate, also a breakdown of all the individual bunkerings, the fuel supplies, that have contributed to your carbon reduction. And each bunkering will tell you what kind of vessel, what feedstock, what type of biofuel, but even data like greenhouse gas intensity, energy content, carbon reduction, etc., etc., etc. And that is, for us, relatively easy to supply because we are a fuel supplier and we control these fuels that we do on behalf of Flexport for its final customers.
Yeah. Thank you so much for showing us around in this area, and that's why I'm personally very happy that we partner up with you. So we have the access to those expertises. Hey, and before we move to the Q&A, that's also a kind reminder to the room to share some questions if you have them in the chat. We'll quickly, just shortly, talk about the case study that we have written down with the Fjällräven team. It's also available on our slides. And while we show you the summary here on the next slide, I just want to ask Gijs and Maria, do you perhaps have any personal learnings or best practices that you want to share? I think the full details we'll keep to the written one online.
Well, I think to start it off, I hinted on this earlier, but to share a key learning, like standardization and understanding your supply chain and emissions is really the first thing. And picking a standard way of calculating your emissions makes it a lot easier to also understand what's happening. Because if you're measuring point A to point B under framework 1 for the number one and it generates 2 metric tons, and for the B says no, it's 4 metric tons of CO2, you don't know what to trust. So know what framework you pick, what the shortcomings are, what the assumptions are, makes it a lot easier to understand your supply chain, your gaps, your opportunities. What I really like about how Flexport is doing this, like the visualization of your emissions is clear and crisp. You can like look on a geographical dimension, you can look on modality dimension, you can slice and dice basically the way you want it. But what I also find very useful to have is that it's not assuming point to point distances, but it's really looking at the actual distance covered, and it's breaking a shipment up. So, for example, if we have a shipment coming from somewhere in Vietnam to the Netherlands, it will break it up from the pre-leg, which is done by a truck, to the port. Then it goes on a feeder vessel from Vietnam to Singapore, then another vessel from Singapore to Rotterdam, and then the truck again from Rotterdam to our warehouse. And by having this level of detail with like rich data, um, all segments filled with their applicable emission factors, gives you just so much information on how your supply chain is built up and where you're actually driving your emissions. That's just super helpful. And like BJ also said, like putting in front of people and decision makers, like how big of an impact air freight makes in terms of CO2 compared to especially ocean freight is a lot of people don't realize that. So having that data and being able to visualize that is of key importance. Also to convince people to start making changes and start planning better to make that model shift where possible.
Yeah. Interesting. Thanks for sharing. Maria, your ambitions, of course. This is you see this only as a small step within the Fjällräven journey. What's your personal learning from this one?
Yeah, exactly. So my personal learning is that we definitely need to understand the financial impact for companies and especially for Fjällräven if we want to achieve our climate targets. So as you said, this is one puzzle piece. So how are we going to finance those certificates in the future? So I guess they will get cheaper once volumes increase and maybe also demands increase. But then other technologies come up, and we really need to make sure that we find a way of financing these solutions to be to stay at the front and to stay a front runner.
Yeah, yeah,
Now,
and
regarding financing, this is also maybe in favor of biofuels. I mean, we talked about offsetting your emissions. Uh, like good quality offsetting certificates are becoming more and more expensive as time progresses. So the difference between insetting for biofuels becomes smaller, and especially when you also consider your total spend on actual freight movements, um, the, the price you pay for biofuels is fairly limited, I would say.
hmm,
I mean, I
Yeah.
cannot judge this for every company, but on the bigger scheme of things, it's fairly limited whilst you still make a significant impact.
yeah. But that's already interesting view because often you hear it's considered expensive or additional cost. But if you look at the total, you really look at the data and the details, it actually falls into place. That's good to hear. Hey, Gijs, while we have you, before we close off and go to the Q&A, any practical tips from your end that you want to share with the room?
Um, but there's not much that would leave you from just trying it out a little bit when we speak about biofuels a little bit in particular. I mean, especially with Flexport, you have a very good way of calculating your emissions. Uh, you can put the percentage that you want to inset through biofuels the way you want it. The impact on your day-to-day operations is next to nothing. So you can just test the waters and see if it's a solution that works for you.
next to the other things that you might try to achieve.
Yeah. And KJ, anything from your end?
Yeah, I think there's two that come to mind. One, make it as easy as possible for your reporting, right? So come up with a system that allows you to measure your supply chain with the same tool. We hear a lot of times from clients where they get a report in this format or a report in this format, and it becomes a lot of work for those internal teams. So figuring out how to streamline that reporting in the best way. And then second, I was at an event, this was maybe 6 months ago now, but a sustainability event where a very big fashion brand said they've done away with product launches, actually setting a date of this is when we're launching this new line. And that allows them to move away from that just-in-time logistics model. But it's also a consumer adjustment as well. And so it's something that I thought was a really interesting, very practical way that a brand can actually influence behavior and allow them to actually take a more emission, less polluting mode of transport as well.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, Maria, anything from your perspective here?
Yeah, I just want to say I love what KJ just said. I'll take it to the management. I think my most practical tip is don't get lost in future developments and visions. Try to adopt things that are already market ready and are available in whatever scale fits your strategy, your budget, your team. There's always something you can do.
Good one. I like it. Keep it practical. And Rogier, anything to add from your perspective on the practical tips?
I think a lot has been said already with my fellow.
It's always a tricky last position.
To be the last. No, I think good things have been said. The need for having the quality data, to have the path clear, the strategy, etc. But I think very simple. Just start. Just start somewhere, and it can be very small. Small steps count as well, but just start somewhere and just learn from it. Act, develop, adapt. But very very small. Take the first step. Time for action. Just do it. That would be my advice.
Yeah, beautiful. Last few words to close off this section of today's webinar. If I look at my personal takeaways, it's basically coming down to know what you're talking about, really get into that data. While you're diving into that data, it's actually easier than you might expect, or more efficient at least. Familiarize yourself with that data and look at what options are out there. It's a complicated, really menu of different choices, but when you have familiarized yourself of the team with it, it becomes actually attainable. It's definitely a best practice to make the team part of it. So don't leave it with big, bold goals on a corporate level, but really break it down, involve the team, and in our case, especially the logistics teams. So that's interesting, and definitely something not to forget is that currently a lot of the things we can do or should do are voluntary, a voluntary market, as explained by Rogier. But soon and in the years ahead, we'll move to a more binding market. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And I'm writing down the portfolio of mitigating options. I think that's a crucial one, to have a few options to choose from and then apply where you find it's most needed and useful. Thanks for the biofuel introduction session there, Rogier. I'm afraid that's the first slide I'll have to retrieve and go through again, but it's good to have this intro. Thank you so much. And it's if you want to dive into that and get started, I think the most important takeaway there that you shared is start looking at certification and make sure that you're talking to right partners and people who really know what they're talking about. Now I think we'll move into the Q&A, and I think the first one pulls up, and that's for you, Rogier, actually. Rogier, can you share your opinion on insetting and offsetting solutions like carbon credits and fuel switch inset certificates from biofuels?
Yes, it's a good question, but I need to, the definition of carbon credits in this way, to our opinion, is offset credits, which we talked about before, offsetting. where insetting is a certificate where the fuel switch has already been conducted. So the certificate is more evidence that the fuel switch from fossil fuel to sustainable biofuel has occurred. As I mentioned before, the certificate, all the broken down data on the bunkering level with all the fuel characteristics. So it's not a credit you simply buy and you sell as a trade. So offsetting is always an option. Might be in some cases even cheaper, but don't forget it's still carbon compensation. So what is the purpose? What do you want to do with the carbon credits? You simply want to do something to contribute to a better world. That's great. Or do you want to put it really in your ESG reporting and in your net zero strategy? Do you actually want to reduce your carbon footprint? If that's what you as a company desire for your scope 3, reduction of upstream and downstream logistics, emissions derived from that, then insetting is the solution because it reduces. And after the fuel switch, the inset certificate basically is the evidence that it simply happened within the book and claim framework. So we would always prefer to actually reduce emissions rather than to compensate.
Yeah, super important to have that difference spelled out and clear to the team. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And is it easier to use biofuels than chasing the ship type, or when companies use third-party shipping companies? KJ, this might be one for you.
Sure, yeah. I would say as of right now, yes, using the biofuel book and claim insetting opportunity is easier because there is no impact on your physical supply chain. And currently, port infrastructure, vessel owner infrastructure is not at a stage that you can have a continually running robust supply chain on carbon neutral or zero emission vessels, right? There are investments being made into those types of ships. But at this stage, you wouldn't be able to, where you're able to operate and actually get space on those ships is incredibly limited. So I think that there's a twofold question here. The second is using a third-party shipping and logistics company. It's also really important as you're going through your RFPs, for example, right? And you're selecting potentially a freight forwarder. What alliances, what ocean carriers, what airlines do those freight forwarders operate with? Do they have the ability to make bookings with specific carriers that are investing into those new generation fuel types? That's a really important thing to keep in mind. So right now, biofuel credits are very much a way that we can take actionable steps. At a later point, I really hope that we'll be able to have global coverage of these e-methanol, e-ammonia type vessels.
Yeah, interesting. And then taking it to basically your end clients, Gijs, with the next question I see showing up. Does Fjällräven notice already a different consumer behavior based on the more sustainable choice you take as a company? And would you say emission reporting is a must to your customers?
Well, fill me in here, Maria, if I'm saying something that might surprise you, but I think, yeah, definitely we have to be transparent on the emissions that we generate through our operations. We know from our customers and like wholesale customers that we sell to that they are critical towards our products and critical towards our supply chain. Maybe it's also with, like, for example, like PFAS. We've been saying no to that for years and free of PFAS also since 2015, if I'm not mistaken. So people do expect us to be on the forefront when it comes to having carbon neutral or carbon friendly solutions. So I would say that yes, this is something that definitely a subset of our customers will request from us. And we've also had instances where customers dropped us an email, said, hey, we saw you delivered a package through this and this company. They're known for whitewashing. Why are you doing this? So we have critical customers for sure.
Yeah. Anything to add, Maria, or is it 100% correct here? All right. I think that's it for today. We'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for your attendance in the room and especially the ones here with me on the virtual room on stage. that would conclude today's webinar. Thanks for the few questions we had. It's great to dive a little bit more deeper there. If you would like Flexport to support and collaborate on your sustainability roadmap, please reach out. We'll share the slides and the recording, and we'll definitely make sure to add our contact details. Before I leave, I would like to point out that my colleagues from the Ocean team we have here in the US and in the US and here in Europe will host a Ocean webinar outlook tomorrow, and that's actually going to be very interesting with the heating Far East westbound market. If you have not signed up, please make sure you do, and if you cannot attend live, we'll send out the recording. We'll copy this slide deck to the notes, and we'll make sure to send it out over email. Thank you so much for joining today, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.